Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
To elaborate, I don't claim the existence of the paranormal from experiences I've had while by myself, which I have quite a few, since those could possibly be discounted by mental illness. I have never shown any other signs of such illnesses like schizophrenia, though. I have had a few experiences that were shared with others, one that I will relate here. Me and two friends were scouting out some woods for a good hiding spot. One of these friends was, and still is, an avid weed grower, just for his own use, and the forest around the other friend's house was quite spacious and desolate. So we hike around for a few hours before it starts getting dark, and we are hiking up a rather large hill. We stopped for a break near the top since we had been walking around for several hours now taking note of potential spots, and it doesn't take long for all three of us to notice something is off. Now it's getting darker, but the sun won't hit the horizon, from our view, for at least another 20, 30 minutes. The valleys in between the hills are pretty shady at this point though, but still high visibility. What we all notice is, of course, the cliché silence. Forests of East Tennessee are never quiet, unless some sort of predator is around. Large cats and feral dog packs are an occasional thing. One friend pulls out his handgun and the other friend and I take out our knives. We decide to start heading back, because being stalked through the woods at night is the opposite of a good idea. So we are walking back down the hill the way we came and hear the distinct crunch of footsteps behind and above us. Standing behind a large tree, as if in a half-assed attempt to hide, was something. I haven't found any kind of official name for this thing, but the description of the creatures in a certain pasta about airsoft players at a military base seems to fit close. Think of a shadow person, except it was a good 8 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and long arms. It was like the build of a cross between a gorilla with long but still bulked arms. It was a good 30, 40 feet from us. We could see the outline of it clearly, but the creature itself was just black shadow. It was completely still, too. We observed it, discussing what the hell we were looking at, and after several minutes of it being so still, we were beginning to think it was a naturally occurring optical illusion. So the friend with the gun stayed where he was while the other friend and I fanned out to the sides to see what we would see from different angles. We stayed about the same distance, sort of trying to circle around it. It didn't take long to realize that we were not seeing a trick of the eyes, but that something was actually there. It stayed still the entire time, and its shape only changed the way you would expect of a three-dimensional object being viewed from a different angle. It was almost flanked on 3 sides now, and still it didn't move. With a large caliber gun ready to shoot, we got ballsy, and our curiosity got the better of us. So we decided to see what would happen if one of us approached it. We discussed it for a bit, and finally decided that I would be the one to do so, since I was the fastest runner. So I slowly and deliberately started approaching it. I stopped for a moment at about 20 feet, and it continued to be as still as a statue. I started again, and once I got to about 15 feet away, which was a major ass clincher, because this thing was huge, it still didn't move but began to fade away, just like a shadow disappearing as you slowly turn on a light with a dimmer switch. At this point, I'm confused as all hell. It's like it was never there. I looked down to my friend with the gun and confirmed that they saw it fade out too. Pic related my Microsoft Paint of what it looked like, roughly. I'm no artist, sue me. So I'm looking down the hill at my friends who are just as confused as me at this point, but then I look past them, a bit further down the hill and off to the side, the same thing, facing their direction from about 50 feet away. Before I can even point it out to him, they suddenly turn the opposite direction from it, looking to a spot down the hill and to my left. I glance over, and there is a second one about 30 feet from me, looking right at me. I turn to try and keep it in my peripheral vision to face my friends better and clue them in on the one behind them, since we are all three now aware of this one, only to see that it has since moved further up the hill, even with my friends, but still at roughly the same distance. "Oh shit, we're flanked," I said as I pointed towards it. Only one of them turns to get eyes on it though, the friend with the knife. Gun Bro is now looking up at my direction. Actually, we're surrounded. Third one 10 yards behind you at 5 o'clock. Yes, I know the pseudo-military talk sounds try-hard, but I come from a family chock full of veterans myself, and divulge in FPS. I suck at shooters, and tactics is my only saving grace. While Gun Bro is an avid FPS player who's picked it up a bit. Knife Bro picked it up from us despite being more for fighting games. I digress though. Anyways, I don't have to even look behind me. Don't need to. I slide down the side of that hill and rejoin them faster than you can say skinwalker. We each get to facing different directions and trying to determine our next move. Surrounded on 3 sides, but at least the open side is downhill, and the way we came as well. The middle one is up the hill and a good distance away. Then, in the same direction as the middle one but much closer, a 4th one starts to fade in. We all 3 speak at the same time. Gun Bro with oh shit, Knife Bro with god damn it, and myself with well fuck. This memory is now one that brings us all a chuckle after the fact, so we keep our head about us and have a quick discussion. If this is hard to believe, it's because A, we're all already familiar with the varying animals that can and will try to kill you in these woods, up to and including bears, and B, although this is one of the more interesting stories I have, it is not our first encounter with weird shit. Others were quite a bit scarier, but the stories are shorter and probably not as interesting. So we establish a few things about these weird shadow beasts, my best idea of what to call them, from the encounter so far. First, they will move when not looking at them. I theorized after the fact that they really liked a certain episode of Doctor Who. Second, they will not be approached to a certain distance before disappearing. So far at least, wasn't in the mood for in-depth and repeated testing of this theory at the time. Third, they seem to not want to approach us to within a certain distance. And fourth, despite being quite imposing, they don't seem to be acting overtly hostile towards us, though they were reacting to our presence. We quickly came to the conclusion that whatever they are, we are in their territory, and they are trying to non-violently herd us away from it. So, outnumbered and likely overpowered. Did I mention how big they were? The top of my head would be about mid-rib level to them, and I'm 6 foot even. We decided it best to GTFO. Gun Bro suggested that they might be trying to herd us into a trap though, so we decided to try and go back the way we came without backs to each other. Our coordination wasn't as good as it could be, because by the time we made it down the hill another 50 feet, another 3 had appeared in places when no one was looking. Took only a split second. Not sure why they did this, seeing as how one of them had no problem appearing out of nowhere right in front of me already, but that seemed to be how they preferred it. It took us an hour before they stopped following us, 7 of them, keeping in a loose semicircle around us, but never coming within 30 or 40 feet of us. After they stopped following us, it took another 45 or so minutes to get back to Gun Bro's house because we were slowed down trying to keep back to back, close together, and moving the same direction, and because we continued to do so after they stopped following, out of extreme and justified paranoia. Not sure what they were, but if feeling ever does mean anything, they didn't feel like they were evil or malicious in any way, but more like the feel you would get being near a wild animal with offspring to defend, giving you that look before you get too close. Would really like to get a better idea of what they are. I've always tried to be of a more scientific mindset, and though I believe in the paranormal, I also believe that the paranormal and/or supernatural is in actuality normal and natural. We just have yet to understand it. Well, there's my tale /x/. Believe it if you want, but this experience is among the chief reasons I believe. If anyone has any ideas WTF those things were, it would be much appreciated. If I didn't say previously, this happened in East Tennessee, near the Appalachian Mountains, and only a couple hours drive from Smoky Mountains National Park.
The fact that you describe these things as gorilla-like and having the ability to appear and disappear is interesting. I'm actually inclined to believe you to some extent, because my uncle has never walked on his own after dark since one time he walked home near a river and a large ape-like creature stood just in front of him. Didn't do anything but stand there, and then he described it as kind of floating away from me across the river slowly, and then I blinked, and it was already on the other side, and it had moved a good 25 meters instantly.
After reading your story, I am very interested in it. If I may, I would like to suggest what I believe those things were. I would like to believe that these were spirits connected to the land, either Native Americans or people that died in or near the forest. I highly recommend doing some research on the place to see if there have been any reported deaths there. I would also recommend returning one day unarmed with your two friends during the same time of day in order to make contact with what the fuck those things were.
I've had someone else suggest they were something along the lines of earth spirits before, and this is of course an area known for being inhabited by natives, Cherokee mostly. As for reported deaths, not many, but people disappear in these woods often, even more so the deeper closer you get to the mountain range itself, though the disappearances are attributed more to another creature that's spotted fairly often. Not sure what to call them, but the picture in the OP of this thread is what they look like, and have been known to be hostile and attack people. I would like to return to the area again, but my friend who lived nearby has since moved, and someone else now owns the property. I sure as hell wouldn't be going back unarmed though. Even without unexplained spooks, these woods are dangerous, and going into them unarmed and unprepared is just asking to never be heard from or seen again. There's other areas of woods I've explored, but have yet to come across those particular creatures, so I assume they stay localized to the patches of forest they consider their territory.
You likely already know this, but that creature is famously known as the Rake. Pretty scary shit, steer clear of that. Two things about going in armed. When you say you're pretty much asking never to be heard from again, I would actually reverse that. If I was a Native American spirit and someone infiltrated my land with advanced weapons, advanced as in more advanced than Indians' weapons were, I'd be pretty pissed off. However, if you came to the land peacefully and willingly, chances are I wouldn't try to ward you away, unless you sought to destroy my land. Although counterintuitive to my previous statements, bring a gun. You do not want to fuck with those physical creatures. Spirituality is one thing, something that can destroy your life from the inside out. Physical beings are worse though. No chance of escape if they want to kill you.
I've heard them called several things, the Rake among them, but they also seem to match the description of what /X/ has come to know as skinwalkers. I hate that they call those that, since I know skinwalkers refer to native shamans that could suppose turn into animals if they wore their fur. I've never had, or heard from anyone in person, about those things being able to look like people, and am pretty sure that's a concoction of /X/ for the creepypasta fad. I can, however, confirm that they can mimic voices and noises, which, while creepy as all hell, isn't exactly far-fetched. After all, parrots and other types of birds are able to do the same. As for your next part, that's also assuming these are spirits of Native Americans. Now, I haven't seen a lot of ghosts and don't claim to be an expert on them, but I highly doubt these were human spirits. I could be wrong, of course, but it doesn't feel right to jump to conclusions one way or another. Around here, the benefits of carrying a gun into the woods greatly outweigh the many risks of going in unarmed. The people who do disappear are, more often than not, the ones who decided to leave their gun home that day. Between the occasional bear, usually not too hostile, thankfully, packs of wild feral dogs, mountain lions, bobcats, the Rake, skinwalker, or whatever it is, spook, it would basically be a self-end. Oh yeah, forgot to mention there is a small breeding population of black panthers around here. I keep forgetting that they are usually considered cryptids in North America, but they've been seen and heard so often, anyone living around here will call you autistic for trying to suggest otherwise. I'm pretty sure at one point someone had a couple of them as exotic pets that got loose, and around here, where there aren't any natural predators, had no trouble surviving and reproducing. Probably the tamest of the claims of this area, but thought it worth mentioning.
All right, before I tell this story, I need to explain something for readers that don't live in warm climates. The inside of a car in the summer heat gets hot enough to cook someone alive. Imagine for a minute being in a low-heat oven. You won't die instantly, but give it enough time, and you wish you did. There's also something I have trouble explaining to myself, and that thing is that monsters do, in some form or another, exist. I won't give too many details about the location of where all this took place, because I don't want some idiot going through the shit I went through. When I was a teenager, I lived in some suburbs on the edge of a larger city. In our town, there was a scrapyard near some old torn-down factories. It was out of the way. No adults went around the place. They didn't want us kids in the place either. It was walled off on one side and had a barbed wire fence on the other side. That didn't stop us, though. A combination of the scrapyard's isolated nature and a gap in the bottom of the fence made it the ideal juvenile hangout. There were 3 sections of the scrapyard, an entrance area filled with broken TVs and collapsing furniture. It looked like a rotting outdoors version of a department store. It was where kids usually went to smoke and drink. The other 2 sections contained derelict vehicles. One contained larger vehicles like buses and trucks. More explicit things generally went on there. The type of things that lead to teenage pregnancy and a small-scale STD outbreak. The other contained smaller vehicles like cars and vans. This place was rarely used for anything. Even the occasional tow truck man would often seem hesitant going in there. I think kids used to do heavier drugs in there at one point. That was, of course, before the accident. There was a boy in my town. I'll call him Lance Prince. He was older than me. We lived in the same neighborhood. I recall seeing him from time to time when I was in grade school. By the time I was a freshman, he was a senior. He died on the 2nd Monday of May. No one knows what clearly happened. His parents disappeared without a trace before his closed casket funeral. All that was known is he skipped school one day to get drunk with friends. He arrived early, and by the time they got there, he was dead. From what I gathered, it was a gory scene. The scrapyard was sealed up. The fence and wall were put up, and kids stayed out for the rest of the year. By the time I started sophomore year, a gap was made in the fence, and kids were already throwing parties there. Around Halloween, I was invited to a party at the place. That was my first time there. I went there on a semi-regular basis until what happened to me in May, during the anniversary of Lance Prince's death. I'll try to explain what happened in the most logical order. I'm still not quite sure what happened. I awoke in a broken-down old car. My head hurt, and I was confused. I examined my surroundings and saw that the hood of the car was rusted. The side view mirrors were cracked to the point they were just shards. The windshields and windows were perfectly intact, though. I looked around outside and saw that there were other cars like mine, all parked in a circle. There were 6 in total. I could see people in them. I wasn't friends with them, but I recognized them from high school. I saw that the car beside me had a guy in my science class named Fred. He was a dorky type of guy, but smart, though. I tried to remember how the hell I got here. Why was I in a car surrounded by people I barely know in the summer heat? Just then, I began to realize I was sweating pretty hard. My clothes were getting wet. I tried to open the passenger side door, but it was either jammed or locked. When I tried to open it, Fred shot up in his car and looked at me. We made eye contact for a second before I began to climb over to the driver's side door to open it. As I did, I heard Carl pounding on his window and yelling something. He was too muffled to hear, but as I turned to look at him, he pointed at the blue car at 9 o'clock to my 6 o'clock. I looked and saw that the car's door was open. I thought about what he was pointing at for me to see, and that's when I saw it. Behind the blue car were 2 sideways SUVs. There was something behind them, though. I could see the side of it peeking behind a corner. It was pulsating like you would expect a heart to. It was also brown with bits of green in color, like an old tree with moss. It was also large, easily 10 to 12 feet tall. I tried to think of what it was, and my mind flashed back to the first time I was in this scrapyard, back during Halloween before the last. I was new to high school. I had no real friends at that point. I was sitting alone during lunch when Fred came up to me and said there was a party at midnight after school. He said I should come, and I did. I showed up there at 6, got drunk at 7, and was sobered up by 9. People were leaving yet. For some reason, I stayed. There were 6 people left by the time it reached 10. I now realize who those 6 people were. It was me, Fred, Lance, and 2 others from our high school. Then there was that man. I didn't recognize who he was, but he looked like he was too old to belong with a set of high school kids. He wore a worn-out-looking suit, which I figured was part of a Halloween costume, which wasn't odd considering several others at the party had on costumes. He also spoke in a deep voice. Well, Lance and the other two kids were joking around. Me and Fred were sitting next to each other silently. The man walked up to us and crouched down in front of us. He told us there was an old urban legend about this place. He said that people used to be sacrificed here. I could hear Lance and the others stop talking, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw them turn to us. He said that he thought he knew the place. He said if we followed him, he could show us what looked like part of a skull that he had found. As he beckoned us closer, I followed, but Fred stayed behind. He was obviously wary of the man, but he still came after I waved to him and asked him to follow. Soon, me and Fred, along with Lance and his two friends, were following that strange man to the back half of this scrapyard. What came after that was a blur. As I look around the scrapyard, I see that in the car next to me, opposite the one Fred sat in, was one of the two kids that were with us that night. Their names escape me. The kid was obviously worried. Hell, he was scared out of his mind. He looked at me, then Fred, then climbed into the back seat of the car he was in. He waited a brief moment, then opened the passenger side back door and shot out of there. He ran over to the gateway to the front yard when it got him. I first saw it moving out of the corner of my eye, and as I turned to look at it, the thing was already on top of him. It was definitely around 10 feet tall. Looking at the thing, it seemed to be made out of what I can only describe as an organic bronze material with green rust spots growing on it, like an unrinsed penny. It was in the shape of something like that of a centaur with 8 spider-like legs, with a torso emerging out that was armed with 4 arms that branched off into many quivering tendrils. The head was locked onto the kid it was chasing. One of its front legs knocked him to the ground, then a tendril stabbed him in the leg and hoisted him upward. It held him high above its head like a fisherman holds a fish he caught. The many slithering tendrils then jabbed into the kid. He screamed so loud I could hear him through the inside of my car until suddenly he fell silent. Then, after a few seconds, I heard a faint gurgling sound that sounded like it would be far more noticeable if I wasn't trapped in a broken-down car. After sitting there for some unknown amount of time, I turned to look at Fred and saw the red smears on the windows of his car. They were words. They spelled out, "It can't see, but it can smell. Don't open your doors." I saw him worn out, laying in the back seat of his car. I realized that he had written the message in his own blood to warn me. I sat back in my prison cell as the horror of the situation set in. This was real. This was no movie. I could die. I tried to take my mind off of my current predicament. I tried to remember how I got involved in this mess, but I could only flash back to what happened this day 1 year ago, the day Lance died. I was sitting next to Fred in English class. He was talking about something, well, I was trying to catch some sleep. That's when one of the teachers walked in. She spoke solemnly. She told us that she had news that would trouble many of us. A student had died. She said his name, and several girls began to cry. I looked around the room, and I could see that most of the class was silent, including Fred. I just laid my head back down. Like I said, I barely knew Lance, so his death didn't mean much to me. We weren't even in the same class. He was just one less face in the crowd. There was only one other thing that stuck with me that day. It was lunchtime, and I was sitting at a table, well, staring out a window, while Fred talked about something which I forgot. I heard that kid, the one who was just killed by that thing, say to someone else, "Do you know if he died at the junkyard?" I turned my head to look at him, and we stared at each other. He clearly wanted to come over and ask me something. I know that he knew something about the scrapyard. He knew what happened that Halloween night when we followed that man, whom I hadn't seen since, into the back part of the scrapyard. Now that kid was dead, killed by the thing that also killed Lance and will soon kill me. That is, if I don't burn alive in this rust bucket. That's when it hit me. I had stopped sweating. I knew what that meant. I began to realize at that moment that if I didn't get out of this derelict death trap, I would be a burnt corpse. If I did make a run for it, my fate could be worse than death. I could look out the window and see what the creature was doing to that guy, and I couldn't even tell if he was dead yet. I looked at the car beside me and saw that Fred had laid back in his driver's seat. He wasn't moving. I would have thought he was dead or asleep if it wasn't for the fact that his eyes were barely open and his chest was panting very faintly. I knew that my last moments were approaching. I thought of every possible escape plan. I tried starting the car, but of course that didn't work. I searched every inch of the car and found nothing but useless crap. I even tried to push the car from inside of it for some idiotic reason. I stared at the creature and its victim. It had its tendrils inside of him. They pierced his skin in a dozen different areas and withered underneath his flesh. He would occasionally twitch and spasm, leading to the discomforting idea that he was still alive and in some form of pain I couldn't even begin to imagine. As I stared at the hellish sight, my vision blurred and I fell back into the driver's seat. I began to remember what happened that Halloween. Me, Fred, Lance, and the boy who was being mauled by that creature, along with some other kid, followed the man in the tattered suit to the back lot. It was the one I was currently imprisoned in. The cars in it were different, but they were in the same pattern as the ones here now. He walked to the center of the yard where the creature stood now. I can remember the visuals very clearly, yet I have trouble remembering everything that was said. I do recall a couple of things the man told us that had stuck with me for a while. He talked about the necessity of sacrifice and how sacrifices of the lesser would strengthen those who were more significant than them. I looked around me and could tell the other kids were disturbed by this, but remained silent. Fred took my hand and walked me out of there. Well, the three others stood there. I looked back as we exited the yard and saw the man staring directly at me. He said something I could barely hear but could still comprehend crystal clear. He said that those who are sacrificed need to be given a choice, to live a little longer and suffer, or to sacrifice themselves and die a quick yet valiant death. I shot back up in my seat. I thought for a moment that I had dreamed that flashback, but then I realized my mind was in a state like that of a waking dream. Everything was fading in and out of focus, and I felt numb. That's when the realization set in. I was dying. These flashbacks weren't my memories being jolted. My life was flashing before my eyes. I climbed into the passenger side of the back seat and steeled myself for what I was about to do. I took one deep breath, then I did it. I opened the door. First I cracked it a little, then I kicked it open. I darted out of the car and toward the front gate. I hoped the creature would be too focused on finishing its current meal to focus on me. I was wrong. I heard a loud clicking like that of someone quietly drumming behind me. I felt something hit me in the back and knock me back 3 feet, into the threshold of the gate leading out of the scrapyard. I got to my knees, and as soon as I did, I felt the tendrils wrap around my torso and hoist me upward. A moment later, I was upside down, staring at the creature in its featureless bronze face. That's when I heard someone yelling. It was Fred. He stood atop the car he was trapped in, across the yard, yelling at the creature. He told it to come get him. He screamed for it to come over to him and fuck him up. He tossed a rock over at it. The rock hit the creature point blank in its non-existent face. A second later, I fell to the ground and rolled back on my feet. I saw the creature pulling him up. We made eye contact one last time, and at that moment I understood what he was doing. I ran out of the scrapyard. I kept running until I was back in the suburbs. My lungs burned, and my legs began to give out. I looked around my surroundings and saw that I was in my own neighborhood. I crawled into my front yard, and my father and sister came out and dragged me inside. She sat me down on the couch, and I fell over. I had one last flashback. I remembered how I got into that scrapyard. That boy, the one who was first eaten, invited us over there. He said he was going to skip school, head to the scrapyard, and pay tribute to Lance on the anniversary of his death. He invited me, some other boy, and Fred. Fred refused, but I agreed. As I walked off with the boy, Fred grabbed my arm and said it could be dangerous over there. He said he suspected that the man in the tattered suit, whom none of us had seen in over a year, had something to do with Lance's death. The man could be there waiting to attack someone. We argued, then he gave in and came to. He said he would back me up in case anything bad happened. When I came to, I was still on the couch. My eyes were open and I could see my parents arguing in front of me. Off to the side, I could see my sister peeking through the door. I could see them, but everything around me sounded muted. Something was wrong with my hearing. They turned to me and saw that I was awake. They yelled at me, asking me if I was all right and what happened. I didn't respond. I believe I was in some form of a catatonic state. What they said for the most part didn't even register. One thing stood out to me though. It still haunts me today. They asked if I saw the creature. After I didn't respond, my dad grabbed me and desperately pleaded with me that I couldn't tell anyone what I saw. I recovered from whatever mental state I was in on my own. By the time I did, however, we had moved to the next town over. I later found out that 3 teens were found dead at that scrapyard. I went out of my way to avoid hearing the news about it, but I knew who they were. The city doubled down on keeping kids out of the scrapyard. A brick wall was erected around the place. I know how much of an idiot people are when they're young and how determined they are when told they should do something. There will be a gap in those walls.
My dad, circa late 90s. Mom, pregnant with me, doing some work with car repos and bounty hunting with his buddy for extra cash. Rural-ass Georgia. Pull up to a yee-ass trailer, normal stuff. Finds living there a guy, 6 foot something, tattoos. Tries to get him out of the trailer, dude. Doesn't want to leave, not because he doesn't want to go to jail, says he's being stalked. Okay, Dad thinks he's schizo. He goes around back, which is about 20-ish feet from the tree line. Here's a voice from behind him. He told me it sounded like those sentence splicing programs people use now. Tells him to leave. Dad tells him fuck off. Gets hit in the back of the head with a stick. Turns around and fires a shot into the woods because he's bleeding now. This thing throws the bullet back, like it caught it almost, and chucks it back like a rock. All he saw was this vaguely upright figure. Couldn't see much because moon wasn't full and no street lights that far out. Gets the hell out. Stops bounty hunting. After telling Mom because she wanted me to have a father who's not killed by some freaky Innawoods shit.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.